There is a list of chemicals that the European Union decided were too dangerous to spray on food crops: carcinogenic, neurotoxic, harmful to bees, to soil, to the farmers applying them, and to the communities living near the farms. The EU looked at the evidence and banned them. Those same chemicals are being sprayed on the coffee beans that American grocery stores sell to 300 million people every morning, legally, without disclosure, without a single word on the label. Coffee standard, Danny Cole. And today we are covering the specific regulatory gap between what Europe decided Americans deserve to know about their coffee and what the United States government decided you do not need to be told. This is not an abstract environmental story. This is about specific named chemicals, specific documented bans, and the specific reason your coffee bag has never mentioned any of them. Stay through every part of this video. The final section covers which brands have voluntarily closed this gap themselves, because the government never required them to. Subscribe right now if this channel has been giving you information that changes how you shop. Every week we go deeper. Part 1. The scale of what gets sprayed. Coffee is one of the most chemically intensive agricultural commodities on Earth. That statement is not hyperbole. It is the documented conclusion of multiple independent research institutions that have studied global coffee farming practices. According to research compiled by Purity Coffee, one of the most cited sources on coffee safety, approximately 40 different agrochemicals are used on conventional coffee crops worldwide. Insecticides, herbicides, fungicides, synthetic fertilizers applied at volumes that accumulate in soil over years of repeated farming. The specific chemicals vary by country and by pest pressure, but the scale is consistent. Conventional coffee farming relies on a significant chemical arsenal to protect the crop that is vulnerable to a long list of insects, fungi, and plant diseases. Here's the number that matters most for this video. Approximately 90% of the coffee sold in American grocery stores is conventionally grown, meaning non-organic, meaning those 40 agrochemicals are part of the production system behind the bag you are most likely holding right now. The question this video answers is not whether those chemicals exist. They do. The question is which ones the European Union decided to ban, and which ones are still being used on American coffee imports because the United States never made the same decision. Part 2. The specific chemicals the EU banned that are still legal on your coffee. The European Union operates on what is called the precautionary principle when it comes to food safety. When scientific evidence suggests a chemical poses significant risk to human health, to bee populations, to soil ecosystems, or to farm worker safety, the EU restricts or bans it, even when that evidence is not yet considered conclusive. The United States operates on a different standard. American regulators generally require more definitive proof of harm before restricting a chemical. The result is a documented list of substances that European consumers are protected from and American consumers are not. In coffee specifically, several chemicals fall directly into this gap. Chlorpyrifos is an organophosphate insecticide used against a range of coffee pests, including the coffee leaf miner and various boring insects. The European Union banned chlorpyrifos in 2020, after the European Food Safety Authority concluded that safe exposure levels for humans could not be established. The United States Environmental Protection Agency under the Biden administration moved to ban food uses of chlorpyrifos in 2021. That ban was subsequently challenged and reversed under regulatory changes in 2023. As of the most recent regulatory review, chlorpyrifos remains a permitted pesticide on coffee imports entering the United States, with no maximum residue limit established specifically for coffee. Endosulfan is an organochlorine insecticide, once widely used in coffee production to combat the coffee cherry borer, one of the most destructive pests in global coffee farming. The European Union banned endosulfan in 2005. The United States phased it out under an EPA agreement in 2012. However, enforcement of that phase out in the countries where American coffee is grown, Brazil, Vietnam, Colombia, Indonesia, and Ethiopia, is inconsistent. Independent testing of imported green coffee has continued to detect endosulfan residues on beans entering the American market. Aldicarb is a systemic carbamate insecticide used against the coffee root knot nematode, a soil-dwelling pest that attacks coffee plant roots. Systemic means the chemical is absorbed through the roots and distributed through the plant's tissue, rather than remaining on the surface. The European Union banned aldicarb entirely. The United States restricted it under an EPA voluntary cancellation agreement in 2010, but the global supply chain for American coffee sources beans from countries where aldicarb remained in use after that date. The amethoxin belongs to the inonicotinoid class of insecticides, the same family of chemicals linked to the collapse of bee populations across Europe and North America. The EU banned outdoor use of all neonicotinoids in 2018 specifically to protect pollinators. Thiamethoxam remains legal for use on agricultural crops in the United States and in the major coffee-growing countries that supply the American market. Carbofurin is a systemic insecticide so toxic that the World Health Organization classified it as extremely hazardous. The EU banned it. The EPA banned its food uses in the United States in 2009, but it remains in active use in parts of Brazil, Colombia, and Central America, the primary sources of American grocery store coffee, with no consistent enforcement mechanism preventing carbofurin-treated beans from entering the U.S. supply chain. Each of these chemicals has been evaluated by European regulators and found unacceptable for food use. Each of them is still reaching American coffee through a supply chain that has no legal obligation to disclose their presence. Part 3. The maximum residue limit gap that nobody talks about. Maximum residue limits, often abbreviated MRLS, are the legal caps on how much of a given pesticide can remain on food when it reaches consumers. They are the primary tool governments use to regulate chemical exposure through diet. The European Union has established maximum residue limits for hundreds of pesticides across thousands of food products, including coffee. The United States has done the same, but there's a significant gap specific to coffee. Purity Coffee has published the most comprehensive publicly available research on coffee pesticide regulation, and it documented a specific list of chemicals that have been detected in coffee production but have no established maximum residue limit for coffee in the United States. No cap, no monitoring requirement, no threshold that triggers regulatory action if exceeded. The list includes ivermectin, cypermethrin, dichlorvos, disulfiton, endosulfan, and propiconazole. Each of these chemicals is documented in coffee farming, each has established maximum residue limits in the European Union, and each lacks equivalent coffee-specific limits in the United States. The practical consequence of this gap is direct. A shipment of green coffee beans that would fail European import testing due to pesticide residue levels exceeding EU maximum residue limits can legally enter an American port without triggering any equivalent inspection or testing requirement. The same beans, the same chemical levels, failed in Hamburg, accepted in New Orleans. This is not a hypothetical scenario. It is a documented structural gap between two regulatory systems, making different decisions about what level of chemical exposure is acceptable for their citizens. Danny Cole here. Drop in the comments whether you currently buy organic or conventional coffee and what drove that decision. After this video, I want to know how many people are reconsidering it. Every comment gets a response. Part 4. What roasting does and what it cannot fix. Here's where this video owes you the honest version of the story, rather than the version that simply maximizes alarm. Roasting is a genuine defense against many surface-applied pesticides. This is documented science. Research on organochlorine pesticides found that high-temperature roasting degrades between 85 and 100% of many residues present on raw green beans. Gamma BHC was completely eliminated by roasting in one Japanese study. Chlordane lost 90%. Heptachlor fell by 99.28%. For the majority of surface-applied pesticides, the temperatures reached during commercial roasting represent a significant reduction in residue levels. But 3 categories of chemicals are not adequately addressed by roasting. Systemic pesticides, the ones absorbed through plant roots and distributed through plant tissue rather than remaining on the surface, are the most significant exception. Aldicarb and carbofurin both discussed earlier in this video, are systemic compounds. When a coffee plant absorbs a systemic pesticide through its roots, that chemical becomes part of the plant's cellular structure. Surface level roasting temperatures affect surface residues. Systemic compounds built into the bean itself are a different problem. Glyphosate, the active ingredient in Roundup and the most widely used herbicide in the world, is used extensively around coffee crops and has demonstrated resistance to complete elimination through roasting. A 2024 study published in Food Additives and Contaminants found that roasting reduced glyphosate levels by more than 73% in tested samples. That is a significant reduction, but a 73% reduction still leaves residue, and the EU's maximum residue limit for glyphosate on coffee is lower than the levels detected in some of those tested beans before roasting. Mycotoxins, toxic compounds produced by mold that can grow on beans during improper drying and storage, are not destroyed by roasting at standard commercial temperatures. Ochratoxin A, the most commonly detected mycotoxin in coffee and classified as a probable human carcinogen by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, survives the roasting process at a meaningful percentage of its pre-roast concentration. The EU sets a maximum limit of 3 micrograms per kilogram for ochratoxin in roasted coffee. The United States has established no equivalent limit. For most conventional coffee drinkers, the roasting process handles the majority of surface pesticide residues before the cup reaches them. The honest science supports that conclusion. But systemic pesticides, glyphosate, and mycotoxins represent genuine gaps in what roasting can address, gaps that the EU has regulated and that the United States has not. Part 5. What is on the label and what never will be. You can read every word on any commercial coffee bag sold in any American grocery store and find no information about any of the chemicals discussed in this video. Not because the brands are required to hide it, because they are not required to disclose it. The Food and Drug Administration's coffee labeling requirements, confirmed from the regulatory labeling resources we reviewed, require a statement of identity, a net weight, and the manufacturer's address. That is the complete mandatory disclosure. No pesticide testing results, no country of origin chemical standards, no maximum residue limit compliance statement, no organic certification requirement, unless the brand voluntarily obtains it. The European Union's food labeling framework requires more. European Union imported food must meet European Union maximum residue limit standards at the point of entry. Shipments that fail are rejected. The testing happens at the border. United States coffee imports do not face the same systematic testing requirement, which is why the same bean that would fail at a European port can legally enter and be sold at an American grocery store. The label on your coffee bag will never tell you which pesticides were applied to the beans inside it. Not because that information does not exist. It exists in the farm records of every certified supply chain, but no law requires it to reach you. Part 6. The 3 things that actually close this gap. The regulatory gap between the EU and the United States is not closing quickly. The political and commercial forces that have kept the maximum residue limit gap open for decades are not diminishing. What you can do is use the information in this video to make purchasing decisions that work around the gap, rather than waiting for regulators to close it. The first and most direct protection is USDA organic certification. USDA organic certification prohibits the intentional use of synthetic pesticides at the growing stage. It does not guarantee zero residue, because glyphosate drift from neighboring conventional farms and soil persistence mean that certified organic beans can test positive for trace glyphosate. But organic certification removes intentional synthetic pesticide application from the equation and is audited annually by a third-party certifier. For the chemicals discussed in this video, chlorpyrifos, endosulfan, aldicarb, thiamethoxam, and carbofuran, organic certification provides the most meaningful available protection. Among widely available grocery store brands, Kicking Horse Coffee, SF Bay Coffee, Rainforest Blend Organic, and Cameron's Coffee are all USDA organic certified. All 3 have appeared on Coffee Standards Trust List. All 3 are family owned or independent. All 3 are available at major grocery chains nationally. The second protection is third-party tested coffee for viewers with specific health concerns. Danger Coffee and Life Boost Coffee both publish third-party laboratory results testing for mycotoxins, heavy metals, and pesticide residues. Their testing documentation is available on their websites and names the specific laboratory and testing methodology used. Whether or not the general population needs that level of testing is a judgment each viewer makes individually based on their health circumstances. For people with mold sensitivity, compromised immune function, or pregnancy, groups for whom the mycotoxin exposure question is more urgent, third-party tested coffee is a meaningful additional layer of protection. The third protection is altitude awareness. Coffee grown at high altitudes faces significantly less pest pressure than low-altitude commercial crops because the cooler temperatures reduce insect activity and fungal growth. Less pest pressure means fewer pesticide applications. Single-origin beans from high-altitude growing regions, such as the Ethiopian highlands above 1,500 meters, Colombian Andean farms, and Guatemalan highland estates, are typically grown in conditions that require significantly lower chemical intervention than the large commercial low-altitude farms that supply most grocery store commodity coffee. The European Union looked at the evidence on these chemicals and decided that the people drinking coffee in Europe deserve better than a supply chain optimized for cost rather than safety. The United States looked at the same evidence and made a different decision. Neither the FDA nor any commercial coffee brand is required to tell you that difference exists. You now know it exists, and you know what to do about it. Thanks for watching Coffee Standard. If this video changed how you read a coffee label, share it with someone who has never thought to look for an organic certification on the coffee they drink every morning. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. Every week we cover what the coffee industry does not put on the label. See you in the next one.